I'm John Strum, and this is Real Talk MS. It's November 11th, and we have a lot to talk about. It seems that the more that experts learn about MS, the evidence just stacks up, and it becomes clear that you can change the trajectory of your MS journey and improve your quality of life by making smart lifestyle choices. Eating a sensible diet, exercising, quitting smoking, watching your alcohol and caffeine consumption, well, they're good ideas for everyone. And they pay especially big dividends if you're living with MS. MS specialist Dr. Barbara Giesser joins me today to explain how smoking, consuming alcohol, and consuming caffeine each impact MS. Dr. Giesser is the director of the MS Comprehensive Care Clinic at the Pacific Neuroscience Institute. She's specialized in caring for people with MS for over 4 decades, and armed with the evidence-based science that she's going to share, you'll be empowered to make the best lifestyle choices for your health and well-being. But before we get to my conversation with Dr. Giesser, there are a few other things that you should know about. I want to give you a quick reminder that tomorrow, November 12th, from 1 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time, the National MS Society is hosting the Black MS Experience Summit. Life for Black people affected by multiple sclerosis carries unique challenges and experiences. Inequities in the healthcare system and clinical disease differences have a very real impact on health outcomes. The Black MS Experience Summit is an opportunity to connect with others who understand these differences in how many Black people experience life with MS. This year, the Black MS Experience has taken place quarterly, and next week's event will focus on 2 important parts of living well with MS: social connections and financial planning. Participants will learn how to stay connected, reduce isolation, and feel more confident about their financial goals. If you'd like to learn more or register for the event, you'll find a link in today's show notes. I also want to mention that we're a little more than a week away from the Hispanic LatinX MS Experience Summit, which takes place on November 19th. The quarterly Hispanic Latinx Experience Summit will also be focusing on social connections and financial planning, and will even include a bilingual Q&A session. To find out more or register for the Hispanic Latinx MS Experience, you can look for that link in today's show notes. As most, if not all of you, already know, MS is a demyelinating disease. The myelin sheath that protects nerve fibers in the central nervous system is damaged, and that damage, that demyelination, is what leads to MS symptoms and disability. So the promise of remyelination is the promise of restoring the function that's been lost by repairing that damaged myelin. And when you think of remyelination, I think it's natural to think of having to add something so that remyelination can occur. But what if the key to myelin repair was dependent upon taking something away? Well, that's exactly what researchers discovered when they identified a protein that actually slows down myelin production. Now, this protein has a very sciencey name. It's called TFII-I, and the name itself isn't really important. What is important is when the researchers suppressed this protein in myelin-producing cells in mice, myelin levels increased, signals moved through the central nervous system faster, and the mice showed improved balance and motor coordination. Now, this is the moment in the podcast when I remind you that there is a vast difference between a mouse brain and a human brain. But the biological mechanisms, this particular TFII-I protein, well, that exists in human brains too. So these study results fall under the column heading Encouraging News. Obviously, there is much more work ahead to determine the outcome of suppressing this protein in myelin-producing cells in humans, but it certainly suggests that there may be a whole new way of promoting remyelination, not by addition, but by subtraction. If you'd like to review the details of this study, you'll find that link in today's show notes. One of the benefits of attending the largest MS research conference in the world is that you find yourself face-to-face with the top MS experts in the world. And this year at ECTRIMS, I had an opportunity to talk with one of those experts when I spoke with Dr. Arman Eshaghi, a National Institute for Health and Care Research Principal Research Fellow at University College London. Dr. Eshaghi's work actually defines the intersection of neurology and artificial intelligence. And in a moment, you'll hear my conversation with Dr. Eshaghi. Dr. Arman Eshaghi is a National Institute for Health and Care Research Principal Research Fellow at University College London. Dr. Eshaghi, your work is at the very exciting intersection of neurology and artificial intelligence. For our audience, could you demystify this a little bit? How are you using AI and machine learning to look at an MRI scan and see things that go beyond what the human eye can detect?
So first of all, thanks very much, John, for the invitation. It's always a pleasure listening to podcasts. I'm all very excited to be here today. AI as a term, also for patients, has been very generic and refers to lots of different ways and tools we use in processing brain and spinal cord scans. But what is probably most used both in the literature and what some patients, not all of them, some patients in some hospitals may see is the kind of AI that looks at mostly brain images and processes those images for both disease activity, that is the white plaques, white matter, what we call hyperintensities or sometimes lesions, and also brain shrinkage. These are the two areas. And one of which is very difficult to quantify that you can probably do only with AI is the brain shrinkage. For a time, it's difficult with the naked eye, even by, for example, a neuroradiologist, to be able to detect that. So specifically, if I want to summarize, I would say detecting changes over time in a way that is more efficient than, for example, as an assistant to a doctor, and also to be able to quantify brain shrinkage in the hospital for patients.
A key promise of AI is the ability to predict. People living with MS live with uncertainty, and their quality of life would be fundamentally changed if they knew what the future might hold for them in terms of their disease course. Based on your modeling, how close are we to using a patient's initial MRI scan and clinical data to accurately predict their long-term disability risk, and more importantly, to select the optimal personalized treatment for that patient?
We have, over the past 10 years, we've made tremendous progress. We are now able in a research setting. So I think it's very important for the public and for the people with MS and also the doctors to understand there is a difference between research and clinical care. So in the research setting, we've done a lot. So in various registries in the United States, outside of the United States, with different data sets, we've done a lot. So we are able to, with moderate and modest accuracy, we are able to tell in research settings, for example, how likely one person might be to become wheelchair bound within a certain number of years. In practice, however, we haven't really translated any of those to a practical tool for patients. So the short answer is, unfortunately, there's nothing as I speak in practice that can be useful. And there are lots of reasons for it, which we can discuss. But there's a lot of promise. We need a lot of more work. And as I said, I use the term modest. Even in a research setting, we can predict and have accuracy that is very modest, which may not be useful if we were to translate that right now for patients.
You mentioned brain shrinkage, brain atrophy earlier. You've published extensively on that for a long time. This was seen as a diffuse late-stage event. How have advanced imaging and computational tools changed our view of atrophy?
So new brain is a very complex tissue. And the brain shrinkage happens in everyone. So if you're in your 30s, your 40s, you're losing your brain. So it's very sad, but that happens for everyone.
Right.
But what happens in MS, that happens much faster. But what is also interesting is that different parts of the brain, and depending on how you calculate that, we can have more than 100 areas in the brain. They shrink at different pace. So what becomes interesting is that with the technologies we have with AI, we are able to quantify those, and we were not able to do that. So you're able, for example, to look at specific areas that might be better related to how you walk, or areas that might be better related to cognitive functioning, for example, memorizing events and so on and so forth. So this is where AI has helped a lot, again, in a research setting.
Do you see being able to use that information as a primary endpoint in a clinical trial one day?
I think that's a very good question. So we are using that as a secondary endpoint as we speak. So as and a primary endpoint in phase 2 trials, I think the question would be, as a primary endpoint in phase 3 trials, is a personal opinion. I don't think that, because it's very difficult to convince a regulator that actually corresponds with the patient benefits, because how patients feel about themselves, about how well they are, doesn't necessarily correspond with how the brain is changing.
Right.
So the regulators, for really good reasons, they don't believe us, anyone else, if you were using that as a primary endpoint. Having said that, we have also seen recent, for example, BTK inhibitors, the recent classes of disease, that they actually don't have that much effect on brain shrinkage. However, they help patients, for example, by delaying disability. So both my personal opinion and also the scientific evidence goes against, at this point in time, using brain shrinkage as a primary endpoint.
Looking ahead, what do you see as the ultimate vision for computational neurology in MS? Is it the creation of a digital twin for every patient, a virtual model of their brain and disease, where you could simulate the effect of different therapies before even prescribing them? What's a big goal that drives your work?
The big goal that drives my work is for patients to get access to their own data, to be empowered enough to be able to use their own data. So we do have this issue that there's less access to doctors, to specialists, and we discuss a lot about MRI. We are now able to, for example, look at the conversations patients are having, with their doctors. A lot of those conversations are not translated into, for example, predictions for future. So we can go above and beyond MRI in computational neurology. And that's exactly what we're doing. Includes, coming up with the disability measures that are hopefully better than what we call EDSS, which some patients may know about. It doesn't really capture disability in MS. That's one area that I'm very hopeful we one day might be able to use AI, not really solve MS all at once, but to have a better measure of well-being. That's the area I see can happen in the future. The other area I would say, so as you mentioned, for example, can I predict what I would look like if I were to receive treatment A versus treatment B? Yes, I think that is possible. But what is important is we've done a lot of AI and MRI. We really need to bring other aspects to the equation before being able to answer these sorts of questions. That includes socioeconomic status, that includes comorbidities, that includes age. We've been excluding lots of patients, more than 55, 60 years of age for decades. So that's a big problem we have. We're now trying to correct the record. We're trying to be inclusive. So these sorts of problems that I think, there are low-hanging fruits that AI can bring to the predictive models and help patients. So I think, the next 3 to 5 years, we'll see more in this area.
Dr. Eshaghi, one of the things I really enjoy about talking with you is you give us a glimpse and what will be possible, a little glimpse into what future treatment might be, what future MS care is going to look like.
and how that was going to improve quality of life for everyone living with MS. Thank you for the work that you do. Thanks for spending a few minutes talking with me today.
It was a pleasure. Thanks very much for having me.
Carbohydrates are a primary source of energy for all living organisms, and that would include people. Carbohydrates come from sugars, starches, and fiber, and carbohydrates modulate the immune system. Now, even though carbohydrates have an effect on the immune system, there isn't a lot of data on the effect of carbohydrates on MS. So a research team in China set out to determine whether carbohydrate intake is associated with the risk of developing MS. The researchers analyzed data from the UK Biobank, a national database that contains health and lifestyle data from people in the United Kingdom. They looked at data from 210,000 people, 495 of whom developed MS over an average follow-up time of 13 and a half years. And using data from self-reported questionnaires, the researchers determined the amount of carbohydrates each person was consuming. Then they applied statistical models to define any significant associations between carbohydrate consumption and the risk of developing MS. The results of their analysis showed that people who developed MS consumed more carbohydrates than people who didn't, demonstrating a significant association with higher carbohydrate consumption linked to a greater risk of developing MS. Some carbohydrates, specifically those from total sugars, fiber, fructose, and glucose, also showed statistically significant associations with the risk of developing MS. When they dove a little deeper into the data, the research team noted that this association between carbohydrates and MS risk was statistically significant in women, but not in men. And when they stratified the statistics by age, they discovered that there was a statistically significant association between total carbohydrate consumption and total sugars and the risk of developing MS for people under the age of 60, and a statistically significant association between the consumption of fiber, fructose, and glucose and MS risk among people over the age of 60. We'll have to see how this evidence is factored into dietary recommendations and guidelines for people who may already be at a higher risk of developing MS. For now, if you'd like to review the details of this study, you'll find a link in today's show notes. In last week's episode, we talked about a large study coming out of the UK that focused on the impact of MS on quality of life. Today, we're looking at the newly published results of a study from a research team at the University of Colorado School of Medicine, and this study assessed quality of life related to cognitive function and fatigue among adults with MS. Cognitive changes and fatigue are two very common symptoms of MS, and they're the kinds of symptoms that can get in the way of fully engaging in your life. So one of the things the research team wanted to explore was whether starting a disease-modifying therapy early after being diagnosed had any impact on quality of life related to cognitive function and fatigue. The researchers created an online survey that was completed by 332 participants. The study participants had an average age of 52, 80% of the participants were women, and 85% of the survey participants were white. On average, the survey participants had been living with MS for just over 15 years, and 81% of the survey participants had started a DMT within a year of being diagnosed. The study results showed that quality of life related to cognitive function was higher among people who had started a DMT early after being diagnosed. One interesting detail is the efficacy of the disease-modifying therapy didn't make any difference. So whether someone started on a lower efficacy disease-modifying therapy or one of the high efficacy DMTs, the impact on their quality of life related to cognitive function was about the same. This finding really speaks to the fact that early intervention, starting on a disease-modifying therapy sooner rather than later, makes a difference. Results of the survey also showed that a higher quality of life related to fatigue was associated with how long an individual had been living with MS and whether they had completed a bachelor's degree. Another interesting detail in this study was that a lower quality of life related to cognitive function or fatigue was related to depression, whether an individual had experienced multiple relapses since their diagnosis, and an individual's level of disability. I think it's pretty easy to see how those three factors would have a negative impact on quality of life. And while someone may not have much control over whether they experience a relapse or their level of MS-related disability, depression is something that can be treated. We know that depression impacts 1 out of every 2 people with MS. So please don't be afraid to mention your mental health status to your neurologist if they aren't asking you about it. Now, if you'd like to review the details of this study, you'll find that link in today's show notes. While we're talking about improving your quality of life, it seems like the ideal time to meet my guest, Dr. Barbara Giesser. MS care begins with the right disease-modifying therapy, but it can't all be about pharmacology. The evidence is clear. There's so much someone living with MS can do for themselves, lifestyle choices they can make that will improve their sense of well-being and quality of life. In a moment, we'll meet my guest, Dr. Barbara Giesser. We've all heard the warnings. Smoking, alcohol, and caffeine are bad for your health, and they can be even worse for your health if you're living with MS. Dr. Barbara Giesser is joining me today to separate the evidence-based facts from the urban legends when it comes to how we talk about cigarettes, alcohol, and caffeine and their impact on MS. Dr. Giesser is the director of the MS Comprehensive Care Clinic at the Pacific Neuroscience Institute. She's specialized in caring for people living with MS for over 4 decades, and I am always happy to say, welcome back to the podcast, Dr. Giesser.
Hi, John. I'm always delighted to be invited to be on your podcast. Thank you. And thank you for giving me this opportunity to again reinforce how important lifestyle choices are for everybody, but especially for people living with MS.
Well, let's jump right into this. What does the research tell us about the effects of smoking on MS?
It's pretty straightforward. There is absolutely nothing good about smoking for people with MS. Smoking is just uniformly bad. We know that exposure to smoke in early life is a risk factor for developing MS. It turns out if parents smoke, that increases the development of the risk of developing MS in the offspring. We know that people who already have MS and smoke have worse neurologic outcomes and may have more progression. And there are some data that suggest that smoking produces deleterious effect on cognitive metrics and brain atrophy. So it's really very simple. If you smoke, stop. If you don't smoke, don't start.
How does smoking cigarettes actually accelerate MS disease progression?
Well, there's probably a number of mechanisms. The most obvious one would be inflammation. Smoking, of course, causes inflammation in the lungs. We know that inflammation is a big driver of some MS pathology. And most people are familiar with the gut microbiome, which are the microorganisms which live in our gut. But it turns out there's a lung microbiome as well. And as you might imagine, smoking has a deleterious effect on the lung microbiome. So inflammation is certainly one mechanism. The other mechanism, another mechanism is that there are a lot of nasty chemicals in cigarette smoke, a lot of toxic things, including things like hydrogen cyanide. So it may be that some of the direct neurotoxic effects are because of the toxic chemicals in smoking as well.
Here's a hypothetical that is probably true for some people. Someone living with MS doesn't smoke, but their partner does. Can that secondhand smoke still affect their MS?
Yes, we think exposure to secondhand smoke is also deleterious. So if you have a partner who smokes, tell them to take it outside.
What about someone who's living with MS and they've smoked for a long time, maybe decades? Will they still benefit if they quit today?
Yes, the good news is that even if you're a long time smoker and you stop smoking, it does lower your risk of progression. So it's never too late to stop smoking.
When we talk about smoking, I think it's typically understood that we're talking about smoking tobacco products, but those aren't the only options available today. Has there been any research that's looked at the impact of vaping on MS?
There isn't as much research on vaping. The issue with vaping is that there are chemicals in the vape product separate from the nicotine that may be harmful. So we just encourage people don't inhale. And the same goes true for inhaling marijuana. Again, it's the smoking, the actual effect of the smoke in the lungs that we're concerned about. So if people do want to take cannabis extracts to treat symptoms or for recreational purposes, we say don't smoke it. There's edibles, there's topical, there's oil.
What about alcohol? How does alcohol affect the body, and how does it affect someone with MS?
So it turns out there's kind of a yin-yang about alcohol. In high doses for anybody, alcohol is a neurotoxin. Alcohol can impair balance and coordination. Alcohol may interfere with the metabolism of certain medication. So there's certainly multiple reasons for people not to drink heavily. It turns out that some research, not only in MS, but some other autoimmune diseases, suggests that low to moderate consumption of alcohol might be beneficial. So I think all the data are not in on this yet, but as I say, there's kind of a yin-yang with alcohol, and people may want to discuss their level of alcohol consumption with their primary care physician and their neurologist.
I just heard you say that alcohol may interfere with the metabolism of certain medications. What's known about consuming alcohol if someone is on an MS disease-modifying therapy?
So alcohol is metabolized through the liver, as are some medications. So you would want to ask your doctor, is my disease-modifying therapy primarily metabolized through the liver, and is alcohol going to be a problem with this?
While we're talking about alcohol, I'm curious, is there any research to support the idea that that daily glass of red wine actually carries health benefits with it?
What I can say is, again, low, which is, or light alcohol consumption, which is defined as less than 3 drinks per week, and moderate alcohol consumption, which is 1 drink or less per day for women and 2 drinks per day or less for men, may possibly be beneficial, but again, everybody should discuss their alcohol use with their physician. There may be other health reasons why alcohol consumption would not be a bad idea.
Well, like alcohol, caffeine can be a little tricky. A lot of people with MS use caffeine to help manage fatigue, but too much caffeine carries side effects. First, what are the benefits of caffeine for someone living with MS?
So, like people without MS, caffeine can certainly fight fatigue, can serve as kind of a pick-me-up. Caffeine and coffee also coffee, in addition to caffeine, also contains compounds called flavonoids, which are kind of the superheroes of the plant kingdom, and they may have anti-inflammatory and antioxidant effects. So there may be some health benefits to coffee. There are a few epidemiologic studies which suggest, they don't prove, but they suggest that coffee drinkers may have a slightly lower risk of MS. So there are a couple of possible health benefits and no real downside to caffeine. One of the main ones would be in anybody, caffeine can stimulate the bladder and make people go to the bathroom a lot. And for some people with MS, this is already an issue. But we don't think there's any risk to drinking coffee or caffeine. Some people may get jittery or have a little bit of a rapid heartbeat.
We can find caffeine in soft drinks and coffee and energy drinks. It's even available in pill form. Is one method of consuming caffeine better or more effective than another?
Well, I think you'd want to certainly check the labels on the energy drinks and the pill forms that will tell you how many milligrams of caffeine is in them. And you can look up how many milligrams of caffeine is in an average cup of coffee. Again, too much of anything is probably not a good idea.
You said something at the very beginning of our conversation about how important it is to consider lifestyle factors. For someone living with MS, they can make a real difference, can't they?
They absolutely do. And one of the more exciting things about practicing neurology and caring for patients with MS in the 21st century is we're starting to get data about the effects of diet and exercise and substances, so we can make real evidence-based recommendations to people. What I find myself telling my patients is medications are generally necessary but not sufficient. Lifestyle choices by themselves are necessary but not sufficient. But when you couple healthy lifestyle choices with our effective medications, you've got your MS firewall.
Well, Dr. Barbara Giesser, I want to thank you for all you do to improve the lives of people living with MS. I always look forward to having you join me on the podcast. Thanks so much for talking with me today.
And John, I'd like to thank you for all you do to improve the lives of people with MS by disseminating all this great information. Thank you again for inviting me on your show.
That's going to wrap up this episode of Real Talk MS. Real Talk MS is powered by the National MS Society. And you can share this episode of the podcast by letting your friends or family members know that all they have to do is point their web browser at realtalkms.com/428. You'll find that link in today's show notes, so you can easily copy and paste it right into an email or a text. November is National Family Caregivers Month. As a former MS caregiver, I can attest to the fact that caring for someone with MS can be emotionally, financially, and logistically challenging. And managing your role as a caregiver while you're holding down a full-time job multiplies that degree of difficulty by a lot. In next week's episode, you'll meet Diana Gracio. And Diana is going to walk us through her strategy for holding down a demanding full-time job in the events industry while caring for her partner who lives with MS. I hope you'll join me next week on Real Talk MS. I'm John Strum. Thanks for listening. Stay safe and make healthy choices.